Hi, everyone. My name is Mabel Chan. I am the co-founder of Albert's List. How many of you in here know what Albert's List is? A raise of hands. Okay, for those that don't, you guys should go on Facebook and join yourself in our community. We actually have 40,000 people in our network. We have an email list of 15,000 members, all job seekers, recruiters, and hiring managers looking to help grow our community. So we do events around the topic of hiring. So if your company is hiring and you want access to 40,000 members, please come see me. So this is actually our 6th event with Codility. We've done many events before last year and this year, and so I wanted to give a big round of applause for Codility for sponsoring this event. Perfect. So without further ado, I'd love to present Sinead Starnes. She was the founding member of the customer success team at Codility, and she works with Codility's enterprise customers, helping them develop effective strategies for coding assessments in their recruiting process.
Thanks so much, Mabel. Like you mentioned, I'm Sinead. Codility is a coding assessment platform where customers can build skill assessments to use with their candidates in the recruitment process. I always learn so much from all the lovely panels on how to really help our customers put that in context to the recruitment process. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and introduce our moderator, Amanda. She is an international HR guru, keynote speaker, and leadership coach. As the director of people and culture at Fivetran, a global SaaS company based in the Bay Area, she is known for disrupting the status quo of the HR space by introducing people-first strategies that hold the industry accountable for creating empowering, inclusive, and equitable workplaces for all. And thanks so much, everyone, for being here today.
Good evening, everybody. How's everyone doing tonight? Good? It's Tuesday. So I'm super excited to be here. Thank you, Codility, for having me and this amazing panel of industry experts. We're here to talk about a really important topic tonight that a lot of tech companies are still struggling with, and that is hiring diverse people. I'm first going to just let our panelists go ahead and introduce themselves just with your name, the company you're representing, and why diversity and inclusion is important to you and why it's important in hiring.
Thank you so much. My name is Kristen Hayward. I work at a company called Superhuman. I'm actually one of my clients through my own people and talent consulting firm called Start With Who. And diversity and inclusion is really important to me because we know firsthand that the best teams are diverse ones. And so making sure that we build teams that are really representative of the communities that we support and therefore build products that are really designed for everyone around the world.
Nice to meet you. My name is Ulysses Smith, pronouns he, him, his. Unless certain days I get a little animated, so she might come out. I actually am not a recruiter. I run diversity, inclusion, and belonging over at Blend, which is a fintech startup focused on making the lending process accessible. This work to me, in practice I've been doing this for quite a while at this point, but we won't talk about it, at a few other companies, including in higher ed and in some other structured places like EA Games, et cetera. But this work is very personal to me. I grew up in Jacksonville, Florida, so not Miami, in North Florida. And growing up as a gay black man, it's, you're subjected to overt acts of discrimination quite a bit. And I think moving to New York and then coming to the Bay and seeing sometimes just how passive it can be and what the impact of that actually looks like, particularly when people go into the workplace. So my goal has actually been at this point now to build a DIB function built on equity that doesn't look like anywhere else in tech at this juncture, right? Where everybody can show up and be their full authentic selves and nobody actually has to compromise any part of themselves in order to show up and do their best work. So I'm able to live my life as an unapologetically black, unapologetically gay man, and I know that's a lot of privilege at this point in time, and I'm anxious to get other people in a place where they're able to do the same. So, go for it.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you. Can we
Yeah, for that. You guys don't look like an audience who just had the privilege of having 20 minutes of open bar. So if you could, y'all could get on board a little bit. Yeah. It's a heavy topic and it's a tough topic, but doesn't mean we can't enjoy ourselves when we're in the company of our peers. My name's Addie Mendoza. I am currently doing hardware recruiting for Facebook's virtual and augmented reality division. So brands like Oculus that make kind of VR headsets. Prior to hiding away in my big corporate cozy bed, I was working at startups as the head of people operations at 100 or less startups in the software space. So I've kind of been on both ends of the spectrum. Diversity is really important to me. I spent some time in higher ed as well. And something that you realize about why diversity, like that's a big question I just asked myself, like why diversity? It's like you spend like 40, 50, 60 hours a week, some of you, at the office and at work and working on work-related things, and you touch people, like you have touch points with different types of people all day long, and all those touch points affect you and affect who you are, and I think more importantly affect your understanding of the world. Like you build knowledge by interacting with people who are different from yourself. It affects who you are and your understanding of the world around you. So I think it's important to build that into the workplace so that we're all becoming like better global citizens.
Hi, my name is Justin. I'm the Director of People and Culture for a company called Archos Labs. You probably have never heard of us. We do internet fraud and security. We power and protect some of the biggest brands in various different industries. DEI is really important to me because my first foray into people ops, which back then we called human resources, was for a startup in 1999 in New York City that had $45 million in venture capital funding. We grew to like 300 people, and it was how we recruited then that is the reason why D&I is so important to me even now, because it was a much different atmosphere back then. And we kind of live in this bubble in which we tout in this country that that is an equal opportunity country. And when in fact, so many people don't have the same opportunities as others. And so having a DEI strategy that allows for you to sort of rebalance that not everyone has the most classic pathway in their career, really provides you the best talent out there. And besides that, you can look at data and you can look at reports that the most diverse teams are the most successful teams.
Thank you all for sharing. I just want to echo what they all said. Diverse teams make companies more successful, more innovative. We can serve our customers more efficiently that way. We can allow our employees to be their authentic selves at work, as Ulysses was saying. But most of all, it's just the right thing to do, right? To have diverse teams. But sometimes when we try to tell our executives that it's just the right thing to do, that's not enough to spend the extra time and resources hiring for diverse people. So how do you all, get buy-in from your executive team and your leadership team on spending that extra time and resources on diverse hiring?
I just thought we were going down the line.
Yeah,
I don't know.
okay, we can do that. That's fine too.
I don't know.
First of all, great question. So I think the first one, and I'm going to appreciate that this might not be a popular sentiment, but the first thing is realize it's almost 2020. If you're in a room with an executive in Silicon Valley and you're having to tell them why, ask yourself if you're in the right room at the right company working for the right leader. I've spent a lot of time trying to tell people why it was important, trying to create the business case, and I realized sometimes it's a problem with them. And if they're in their heart of hearts, they don't want to treat people equity, they don't want to give people equal opportunity, you might not be able to change that. And you might do some damage to yourself emotionally and mentally in the process. So I think, first of all, just be open to the idea that you might be in the wrong room at the wrong company. And then I think the second part is when you do get in the right room and you do have someone that genuinely is listening to the conversation and doesn't know where to start, create this space for someone to tell you they don't know where to start, that they want to be an ally, that they want to create employee resource groups, and they don't know how to do that, and they're embarrassed at how little they know, and they're really looking to you to be a coach and advisor.
I mean, if they don't have buy-in, point them to any McKinsey report on D&I. if they're not following those reports and reading those statistics and data, like the millennials make up the largest workforce in the country specifically right now, and over 75% of them look for a DEI program at any tech company as one of the major reasons why they want to join that company. It's also really important that if you are in people operations or you're in recruiting, you're looking for your next opportunity, look at your leadership team. Look at your board members. Like 84% of tech companies don't have a female board member, and like over 54% don't have a woman on the leadership team. I was fortunate that when I was looking for my next opportunity and looked at my leadership team, a lot of white young men, we also had a female board member as one of our 3 board members, and 2 of our advisors at the time were women. And I'm fortunate enough that we do have women in leadership and director roles and sitting on our leadership team who are not only women, but people of color. So that's really important. But, you know, leadership, you do have to have that buy-in. If they don't morally believe that, you know, DEI is an important thing to have at your company or an important incentive, there are more reports than you can list that you can show them to show why there's a return on investment for diverse and inclusive teams.
So thank you for sharing. So my next question, I'm just going to pivot a little bit more into actual recruiting practices. So I want to talk about structured interviews, because that is one of the most important ways that we can create an equitable interview process and make sure that all candidates have the same playing field. So I would like to ask you, the panelists, how do you ensure your candidates have equal interview processes and experiences for each role? Do you have structured interviews, and how do you kick off a new position?
The recruiter answer. Yeah, the answer is yes. Even when I was at a small company, I think that was one of the most important things. It's how you remain objective. It's like set your objectively measurable things that are required to get this job done and get this job done well and for this person to succeed at the company, and then measure against those. I think that the structure of having, like you kind of mentioned, like what's the structure? Kicking off, opening a new role, laying that foundation early on. I call it, it's exactly what I call it. It's like a kickoff meeting where you like go through basically an intake. It's like, okay, the hiring manager, yes, they know like what they need and kind of like what they want in their mind. That might not always be what is actually necessary to get that job done, right? They're like in their mind, maybe they need a salesperson who's gonna bring in tons of money. So they're like, I need someone who has worked on these deals, has 10 years of experience, da 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 da. And you're like, okay, but can we break it down? Like, we just need someone who actually like has great presentation skills, who understands the SaaS cycle, things like that. So I highly encourage talent professionals as strategic recruiting partners to challenge your hiring managers sometimes from the step 1 of the intake to break down what the objectively measurable skills are, build those into the metrics of how you're gonna evaluate your candidates. The whole interviewing team on board from the beginning, potentially in that intake meeting, right? Kind of beyond just you and the hiring manager, everyone who's gonna be interviewing the candidate, and have a touch point with the candidate on the same page.
Agreed. Kudos, all ditto. I think, is everybody clear on what a structured interview process actually is? Because it's a rare thing out here. Yeah. A lot of work. You're probably familiar with the, let me spend 20 minutes with you and talk to you about all the things that we have in common and really love, right? How much do you like skiing? I'm from Florida, we don't ski, but it's one of those things that people talk about all the time here. We go to Tahoe, seems to be very popular out here. Not for me. So a structured interview process is the direct opposite, right? This is where you actually do have that kickoff even before the job is posted, right? Where you're actually going through and you're talking about what are the core technical skills required for this particular role, for somebody to be successful in this role? What are the behavioral competencies required for somebody to be successful in this role? And then what are the things that are actually nice to have? So like industry experience is a nice to have. That's not something that is actually a core required skill, right, for a role, right? So once we're all clear on that and what those successful criteria are, then we can move on to actually looking at the process itself. And structured interview processes are put in place, and we use them at Blend. They're put in place specifically to mitigate bias in the hiring process, right? So you start this now, meaning that now that everybody is clear on what the criteria are, you set your actual evaluation criteria. So meaning Most people probably use Lever or Greenhouse or whatever ATS you use, where you actually score candidates in there. Everybody should be clear on what the evaluation criteria are at that point, or what each number means. So 1 means no, we're not hiring this person at all because they don't possess any of those core criteria that we specified earlier. 4 means not only do they possess those core criteria, they actually have additional skill sets, right? And all the nice to have that means we would love to have them here at an organization, right? So that's a little different. Post that, or in addition to that, your questions should be the same. Every candidate is asked the exact same questions. It is very unfair to ask candidates different questions. It means you're not evaluating candidates the same way, right? Yes, you can ask different follow-up questions depending on the answers that candidates give, but the core questions the core questions that you ask should revolve around the skills that you said were needed to be successful in the role. Imagine that. See how a structure is happening, you're flowing, everything's consistent, right? It means that the panel and the panelists themselves are very clear on what questions they're asking, what skills they're assessing for, and the panel itself is diverse, right? So not only do you have people from various demographics groups present, you also have people from across the organization present. So if we say that one of the skills we're requiring here, or behavioral competencies we're requiring, is collaboration, then you should probably have cross-functional teams interviewing the candidate, right, to actually assess for that, right? And in some cases, you actually have people on site performing actual tasks that they might have to do in the job itself, right? Not every organization does that, but some do, right? Similar to the technical screen or whiteboarding, which you can talk about another time, but that. And then finally, you're hiding the feedback from other evaluators, right? So nobody gets to see anybody else's feedback. In theory, right, the feedback, good and bad, and places to improve is all put into in whatever system you use. Whoever the lead recruiter is summarizing that data, hitting all the major themes, averaging the score, and that's what's used in the candidate debrief, right, as the basis for that discussion. I know in practice that does not happen all the time. I'm whispering to so-and-so, you wouldn't believe what this candidate said in this thing. You need to hone in on that, because I didn't really care for her, right? That's what's happening. That's what should not be happening, right? Because now you're going into your process, picking up all the things, looking for confirmation of all the things I said I didn't like in this candidate. And that's not what's supposed to happen. So structured interview process is that. That's what it's supposed to be, and that's how you're actually mitigating bias in that process. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to pontificate, but yeah, who does this belong to? Take this.
So you touched on a really important point, just on establishing what the core criteria is for a role. So what happens when you deal with hiring managers, and we've all dealt with this, who have way too many requirements that are just really not necessary? What's your strategy on dealing with hiring managers like that, and kind of narrowing down what they are really looking for?
You rewrite.
Yeah.
You rewrite their job description. You sit with their team, and you sit with their team and kind of do a roundtable and figure out what are the must-haves and nice-to-haves versus requirements. I think that's really important. I'm not a fan of like the 20 things that you have to have that are really, who is ever going to meet all of those 20 items, is what are the must-haves? What are the nice-to-haves? What would exacerbate the role? What would make it better? I think that's really important. And sometimes you have to teach. You have to teach them what kind of a candidate they're looking for. You have to teach them what a job description is supposed to look like. And then you kind of have them look inwards, like, well, look at your team. Which one of your team members meets your, I'm not going to use the word unicorn because I also can't stand that word, or evangelist. But look at your core team and figure out which one of these people actually hits every one of the 20 items that you just handed me. You just have to re-educate sometime in a very, nurturing way.
Oh my God, I'm gonna second that. A lot of times the hiring managers don't get that your job is hard. When you're a recruiter, they're like, it's fine, put those 20 things in LinkedIn and then hire all those people. And they don't know that that's not how it works, right? And it's about educating them and about being a strategic partner. When you were pulling those statistics earlier on DRI and all these things, recruiting is also a great area to arm yourself with data and bring it to your hiring manager. It's like, okay, you really want all these 20 things? I found those things, and guess what? There's 3 people, and they're all very happily employed. Like, do that. That's okay, to show them that why it's unreasonable, right? Like, arm yourself with data so you get their buy-in. They're on board. They're like, I see why we must broaden our perspectives.
So this is a great segue actually into my next topic, which is job descriptions. So you mentioned that you need to rewrite the job description for the hiring manager if they are trying to put 50,000 things in there that's required for a job. That's just not reality. So how do you make sure that you're writing job descriptions in a really inclusive way that's going to attract a diverse pipeline of candidates? Because we know that women specifically will not apply to a job unless they have at least 70% of the qualifications of the job. And so if you have a whole bunch of different qualifications that aren't necessary, you're going to eliminate a lot of people. So how do you go about writing your job descriptions in an inclusive way?
I now have a whole legal team to do it for me, which is great at Facebook. You forward it to legal, and they check it off. No, basically, our core requirement is that everything has to be objectively measurable. Similar to you said, from day one, before you open the job, before you post the job, before you interview a single person, you meet, you understand what those requirements are. I think that's really important from the intake stage. But even in those requirements, you're like, what do we need? We need someone who's strong at this skill. I'm like, tell me how you're gonna know if they strong. Like those are some simple traps that we fall into. It's like, what's actually required? Like, they have experience with this tool. They have a knowledge of these processes. Those we can measure. We can ask them about that in their interview. We can ask them about their experience with this tool. We can test their knowledge of these processes. And those are objectively measurable things. For every bullet point in your requirements, I would honestly sit there and evaluate and ask yourself, how would I measure this for a yes or no if they have it, if I was to talk to the candidate? I think it's a really good starting point, at least.
I think to the point earlier about influencing is also sanity checking it. My favorite is when I get a job description, and when you add it all up, they want someone that has like 45 years of experience with a technology that just came out 5 years ago. And so I think the sanity checking and utilizing search capabilities to show managers sometimes what they want is just not possible. But I think the other thing that's also really important is creating space. And so the way that I always like to approach it with managers is, like, would you rather be able to choose from a bigger pool of candidates or a smaller pool of candidates? And because those soft skills are going to be so important, you're not going to be able to see them on someone's resume. If you make the long list of, 10 years of experience in this, 5 years of experience in this, must have used these 3 tools, you're going to limit your ability to talk to candidates and be able to look for those things like that growth mindset that's so important. Someone that is going to be able to collaborate with others, because you're going to limit the number of conversations you're going to be able to have.
So the company that I work for, Fivetran, is in the process of considering eliminating college degrees for all of our positions unless it's a super, super unique role. Do your companies have any policies around that for certain positions? And how do you feel about needing a college degree for roles in tech in 2019?
For sure. Just to go back to your previous question, because I know a lot of people are here, we use this software. Like, there's a lot of software out there that actually does do augmented writing that actually helps to limit the bias within your job descriptions themselves. My caution there is, because we use it ourselves, but my caution there is you must couple that with education, ongoing education with your workforce, not just your hiring managers, right? Because people still need to know, like, yes, there is coded language out there. Yes, there's still language that you will eventually use. You might use it in a meeting. You might use it in your emails. You might use it somewhere else, right? That limits people. That actually limits the response you'll get from different audiences. So here's some things to be aware of. To your point about educational requirements, we've removed all educational requirements from our job descriptions even prior to my arrival at Blend, with the exception of whether or not you are in a particular role that requires you to have certification. So, like, if you're in accounting, right, you must be a CPA, right? You must be certified. If you're, oh my God, a lawyer, oh my God, well, you must be barred, right? That'd be good, right? So, I mean, those requirements like that make sense, but do you need to have come from an unnamed school out here that everybody seems to like, but I went to Cornell, so I don't know that. I'm just kidding. I'm not. But do you have to have gone to Stanford and get your CS degree and whatever else? No, you don't need to be from a top 20 school in order to get to be an engineer. That's just not something that's required. The same thing for anybody else. And we also should question the years of experience that we require for people to have in any given industry, right? I think that's unrealistic. We don't hold founders to the same standard that we hold hold our employees, and it shows, and it makes it's actually a little irritating at times. It's like, but you didn't finish college. How are you requiring everybody else to? That makes no sense. Like so it's just one of those things to think about.
And I would second that for gender bias built into hiring. If you guys think about software engineers or any type of engineer that they required 10 plus years experience, it's like, how many women were encouraged to be pursuing engineering degrees at that point in time? So you're already inherently building in a bias in the job description to weed out people who could be skill-wise 100% qualified with that type of requirement. So definitely agree.
And you can absolutely, you can Google the words not to use in a job description. It is that simple, and there's probably 3,000 articles. Like, never use the word rock star, never use the word ninja, never use the word unicorn, never use the word hacker. I mean, those are just like simple words. And I'll be honest, like, we don't use the word ninja, but I've heard the word dojo. He's joining the customer success dojo, and it makes my skin crawl. And you can you can educate, you can show them, but there's simple things that you can do to educate yourself, and then educate your hiring managers on what they should and should not be saying of words that, like, out of the gate will bias a whole pool of candidates. In terms of the college, we try very hard not to put in those requirements. Usually it's in a nice to have, unless it's a very specific role, like Ulysses mentioned, like a CPA, or we're gonna start looking for a contracts manager. You gotta have a legal degree. I mean, there's certain things that you kind of have to, unless there's roles that you don't need that for, that years of experience will supersede that. That's really important, or, not being part of the big two in the Bay Area for computer science degrees. There are many other schools that graduate just as qualified people, or there are people who have taken a pathway, they're self-taught, they've gone to a boot camp, and they've proven their technical chops.
Yeah, magical phrase for job descriptions, or equivalent experience.
Yep. Thank you. So I want to pivot now into software for diversity recruiting. So do you use any tools that are for this, specifically helping you build a diverse pipeline of candidates? And how do you go about vetting them to make sure they actually work? I know my LinkedIn box is full of salespeople pitching different diversity recruiting tools to me all the time, but I don't really know if any of them work. And so we're in the process of figuring out which ones we want to use at Fivetran. So I'd love to hear from you if you have any recommendations for the group.
I cheat. So we just started a recruiting budget for 2019-2020, and we didn't have it in our budget to get Textio. That's the reality. I really like that platform, so what did I do? I looked for companies that use Textio, and I look at their job descriptions, and I look at our job descriptions, and I compare the two. Forward, which is a really new health initiative company in SF, I love their job descriptions. They don't have must-haves or nice-to-haves. They have about the role, about you. That's the extent of their job description. It's phenomenal. Then I look at Textio. How do you write your job descriptions? And I kind of mimic that. I look at Reddit. I look at other companies that I have a lot of friends who work in DEI, like Michelle Kim, who's the CEO of Awaken. I look at how she writes her job descriptions. How do you write your job descriptions? Because I know you don't have the budget for Textio if we don't have the budget for Textio. And I look at other companies out there that are really promoting a DEI plan, or who are known to win awards, and or have employees actually giving reviews on Glassdoor and other places about their DEI experience. And to be honest, I look at their job descriptions and I figure out, what are we doing that they're not doing? We make some small adjustments, and then you look at the data. How many people applying for this role versus similar roles at similar times are now far more diverse, or gender diverse, or non-binary diverse? Like, you look at all of those things and you look at those metrics and realize, okay, I've made significant changes. This is going to become the status quo.
Great.
Why do you do that? It's like, don't give it to me. I pontificate. No shade. I would always caution diversity indices that are put out, especially as they pertain to the tech industry, only because the criteria that are used are not that specific. It's like, whoa, do you have ERGs? 100%. That does not mean you're like a top-ranked organization when it comes to that. It's very hard to see within an organization and see what the actual strategy is, right? What is it like for people? Are we actually integrating this into every facet of the business outside of recruiting? I don't sit in in human resources or people ops or recruiting. I sit in strategic operations, basically with our chief of staff to the CEO. So it's a little different for me. So I view this practice very different overall. So I'm always like cautious of indices. It's great to be ranked, but it's also like, how do we actually get here? What are the criteria? When it comes to actually using software to recruit folks, I think I respect there are a couple of platforms out there that I think are helpful in some senses. I've used some in many places, but to be honest, I think the most effective thing, especially for recruiting underrepresented candidates. So, let's call it who we're talking about. So we're looking at Black Latinx, American Indian, Native American, Alaska Native, and then Native Hawaiian, other Pacific Islander, is actually to physically go to these communities. I think the reality is, again, I respect the hustle. I understand everybody wants to find, it's their tendency in the Bay Area to find a tech solution to a problem. The reality is there's so many groups who have been purposefully excluded from the practice for a long time, who don't know oftentimes what it takes to be included. What word should I use in order to get my LinkedIn seen? Am I even supposed to have a LinkedIn, right? If that's not in my curriculum, if nobody's telling me this, all these other things, right? So I prefer, and we at Blend, that's been the big habit, the big push I've been giving to my recruiters, that by all means, continue to source the way you do for other candidates, but when it comes to these groups, make yourself known to them. We're actually getting from behind the screen. We're going to go to these places. Port Petala has suffered through a couple of my recruiting events before. Like, we're going to go there. We're going to actually have conversations. And then you're going to eliminate that phrase from your vocabulary that says, well, there just aren't enough qualified X group out there, right? Because now you're in a room full of them, and you won't say that to their face. But it's a little different when you say that behind the screen, oftentimes. So by all means, I think there are great software tools out there. You can go find them. But I'd still say couple that with actually physically going to places where these groups are present on their terms, not on yours. Right? Oh, I keep forgetting that. See, I have the mic already.
I found one, when I was at smaller companies especially, I found one potentially easily actionable thing that some software platforms like ATSs offer is anonymization. It's kind of like a super simple thing. Like, yes, you should be like trying to educate your team about bias and have them consider diverse candidates. And at Facebook, we're really big about creating a diverse slate of candidates. Like, you don't got to hire the diverse candidate, but like at least interview some. That's like a Sheryl Sandberg rule. Like, every role you have to at least consider a candidate from an underrepresented background. But sometimes when you're at a small company and a startup, like, you don't have that option. There's like 6 people who applied to your role, and then like only 2 people ever responded to the hundreds of your emails. So anonymization is a tool that can kind of eliminate internal bias, where it's like, wipe the name from the resume. Don't attach a name to the coding sample that person sent. And you're like, it just super easy, actionable way to kind of like eliminate a potential biased response to either that resume or that coding sample.
Sorry.
Plus one on the anonymization. That's one of my favorite features of Greenhouse. Intello also has anonymization for your sourcing efforts, including when you submit people to managers. You can hide like schools from them. I don't think you can hide companies. I'm trying to like visualize it in my head. But that I found has been really helpful, especially if you do have managers that do have that school here in the Bay Area bias. It's been very, very helpful to hide that from managers as well.
Yeah, so I definitely agree with, software cannot fix all of our diversity issues. That's a given. So how do you all, I guess, get out in the community and connect with diverse candidates? Are there meetup groups that you frequent? Are there Facebook groups, LinkedIn groups? Where do you source diverse people for your roles?
You're so funny. She goes, "This is all you." I think there are a lot of sources, but I want to back up. I could only, and this is a general thing for everybody. I think one of the things, I feel like I wrote about this not too long ago, but I think we have to be, one of the things I've impressed upon my recruiting team is that we have to be extremely intentional about our language, because otherwise we can't, if we're unable to acknowledge a problem or acknowledge somebody's absence or a group's absence, then we can't actually go and fix the problem. And so I've watched a couple practices that have irked me. So one was at a previous company, not to be named, I literally sat with the recruiting team during kind of the first couple of weeks just to say, hey, walk me through your sourcing. Like, I want to see what you do when you source. So how do you do? And I don't know if it was nerves. I don't know if it was anything else, but I literally watched these individuals like skip over all the black faces. Like, just literally like skip over. And I'm like, huh. So that's fascinating, and it's one of those things where like, I know you probably didn't mean that, and they're probably in their mind like, oh, I don't want him to think I'm clicking on the black face just because it's a black person and he's black, oh my God. So, you're giving them the benefit of the doubt, but it's one of those things like, I had to go through this exercise with the recruiting team since then to say, first things I want you to work with me on is I repeat after me, call and response. You can do it in the room. Repeat after me, say black. Right? It's hard. Say Latinx, right? And you go through these names because people think it's a cuss word. They think these are cuss words and they can't say them because if they say them, then it's a problem. And I'm like, no. You can't say we're missing diverse people. That's a euphemism. No. And also that makes no sense. You are missing, this is a diverse group of people. Like, we have diverse opinions. Diversity means difference. That is literally all it means. It doesn't mean black. Diversity does not equate to black. Diversity does not equate to women. That's not what that means. But because we keep saying that in tech, everybody keeps viewing it that way. And then as a practitioner, you always run into the issue when we talk about buy-in where the majority never wants to get involved because they're like, oh, diversity doesn't pertain to me. Right? That's not my thing. It's for the other group of people, right? Which is what makes it difficult when we're sourcing to actually get people to go places. So what we've been doing is being very intentional about the roles we have at the department level. So yes, Blend can sponsor Afrotech, Blend can sponsor tech inclusion and speak at tech inclusion, and Blend can sponsor Lesbians Who Tech. That's great as a big brand, but when we're looking to go to specific departments, we're like, we don't have to go to everybody's conference and everybody's summit. Let's host some of our own things. Let's host a Women in Engineering Summit, right? Let's actually do that. Let's show people kind of what the talent is out here. Let's actually just see what it is. We've hosted other functions that have nothing to do with roles. We hosted a TGNC function, a transgender, non-binary or non-conforming function earlier in the year, just as no program, just literally an informal social gathering because it was an affinity space that was needed. And when people come in and they're able to see, wow, this is the culture here. This is what people are thinking about, right? They're not overtly trying to recruit me or anything. They're actually just interested in getting to know who I am and providing this space for me. And so I would encourage people to host your own events, right? Host them in partnership with other companies, right? We're not all in competition like that. It's not that serious, right? There's plenty of talent out there, right? Even if we isolated the top 20 CS programs, right, in the country, which you should stop doing, by the way. But even if we did that, right, we see 9% of their graduates are Black and Latinx, right, in CS programs, which is by far not enough, right? But the reality is they're being hired at a rate about 4.5%, right? So you're telling me that the talent's not out there, but even the talent in the pool that you're looking in, you're not hiring them. So they're not being hired at all when you look at it in the grand scheme of things. So I would tell people, you can partner with universities and organizations like that, but actually just physically host your own events, and go to places where you'll actually find these groups of people. It actually does a lot more than you think. Make yourself vulnerable and step outside of your comfort zone and go do it. I pontificated again, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I think the underlying theme there is employer branding, and that is, we'll get to that a little bit later, but Fivetran is doing the same thing. We host quarterly Inclusion Summit events where it's simple. We just have food and drinks, and we invite the community, and we have a panel of speakers that talk about a different inclusion topic. So our first one was during Women's History Month this year, and it was about eliminating female competition in the workplace and how females can support each other at work. The next one was for Pride Month, and then we just had one about working parents and their experiences, managing a family and a full-time job in technology. So I definitely would recommend you do these events and that you get buy-in from your managers or leaders at your company to host these community meetups, because they are very effective putting your employer brand in front of candidates. Any other thoughts on that you'd like to share?
I think what you said about partnering with organizations is really important. When you're a small, under-resourced startup, sometimes you're like, I can't host like a 700-person Women in Tech Summit, and that's okay. You can reach out to women who code who just need a place to have their Ruby on Rails meetup on a Tuesday night. Yeah. Like that's enough of a touch point where you're getting to know a community, and as you said, their employer brand is starting to get out there. There's like 16 more, it's only 16 people who came to your office. That's 16 more people who now know about your company and what you do that you didn't before, so.
One thing that's really helped me is actually not necessarily a tool, but as I learn about different organizations for different underrepresented groups, actually building them into our search booleans. And so anytime we kick off a new role, we kick off the new role by running that Boolean, which is different diversity gaps we have as a company. And it's nice because that's one of the first things we do when we start a search is, the first 200 people that we reach out to for any given search are coming from groups that we've identified as underrepresented at the company, which, to your point, usually it would be the opposite. And I found that's really helpful because you learn about so many different groups, and it's a way to make them more actionable.
So one thing I want to touch on is what diversity means globally, because in the United States, we have a lot more definitions of what diversity means to us, but in other countries, for example, Fivetran is in India and Ireland, soon to be Russia, as well as Denver and Oakland. So, all of our different countries that we're in have different definitions of diversity. They don't really talk about racial diversity in India and Ireland because they don't really have it. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's just that's just not what their forefront is. And so they talk more about gender diversity. So have you had these experiences at all, for the people who work at global organizations?
So our biggest team is in Australia. It's a much different atmosphere. It's a much different culture. It's a much different everything. And Australia in general, when you talk about diversity and inclusion, it is almost primarily gender-based. It is all the incentives and programs that you see are male versus female, and what those numbers look like, et cetera. I was trying to do research to provide one of our founders on diversity and inclusion in Australia to kind of, because it's very important to him. It's kind of weird. So our Australian founder runs the US office, and our American founder runs the Australian office. One is product and one is more executive level. So it's very different. But in trying to, and having the initial conversations with some of the hiring managers, I actually had to educate them that actually a person of Asian descent is actually a person of color. Like that didn't resonate to them. It was so far removed from just their everyday, understanding of what that, so we had to have a lot of discussions about what, race and everything. But I was looking up a very large organization there that I won't mention that boasts that they are 33% female and they're doing a very big diversity and inclusion program, and they want to be 40% female by like 2022. And so I looked up their diversity and inclusion advisory board, and it was 12 people, 10 of them were white men. One was an Asian woman, and one because she identified as was lesbian. But so 10 people on your advisory board are white males. So it's DEI in every different country requires research. It requires understanding their culture, understanding what their hiring practices have been. It gets granular. So I had to look really deep in Australia, how many women are involved in STEM programs in Australia? How many people of color that you actually acknowledge as people of color are involved in STEM programs in Australia, like engineering? Where the majority of women and people of color in engineering getting their degrees from? Is it coding schools? Is it Auckland University? Where is all that coming from? It took a lot of digging and research because they don't have the data that we have, because they are still behind where a lot of the tech companies in the US are. So it requires research, and it is way different. In every single country, like you mentioned, like India, like Ireland, there's not a lot of racial diversity. In France, completely different as well. In so many different countries, it just requires some diligence.
So there's a lot of different thoughts on this. Some companies think that referral programs kill diversity, and in some ways they can. So do you have one at your companies that you are representing today? If so, what does your referral program look like? And what are your overall thoughts on what they do for diversity?
I have a lot of thoughts about referrals. It is a very hazardous road to homogeneity. Like, if you have like 19 Asian males on your engineering team and you're like, hey, refer your friends who also code, like, let's guess what those people are gonna be. And it also means that they probably come from the same kind of backgrounds, right? Like, where do you meet your fellow engineers? Either at the program you're at. So like the sources are all the same. And so that in one way is dangerous. The benefit, of course, is pipeline, additional candidates. And number two, unknown, right? Like, that takes one unknown variable like out of the equation. Like, when you meet a new candidate, basically it's all unknown, and then the interview process chips away at those unknowns as you get to know them. It's like, great, we actually have a known variable going into the situation when it's a referral candidate. This is gonna sound really mean, but honestly, I think the best way to avoid that homogeneity is to not be a lazy recruiter. I think that if you are getting a majority of your candidates hired from referrals, it means that you were like, oh great, let me process these referrals. Like, what recruiting are you really doing if you're like, hey, thanks for your referral for your friend who's already interested, and then you like push them through the interview process and get them hired? Sometimes that does result in the best hire, but I would guarantee you that's not 100% of the time, right? Like, as a recruiter, as a sourcer, your job is to go out and find the best talent. That means you need to find lots of people and lots of conversations to bring to the table and evaluate your best option at the time and like bring them into the fold. So for me, I think referrals are a great source of pipeline, but they are meant to supplement your pipeline. At the end of the day, they're meant to surface some great connections and throw some known variables in there. But at the end of the day, your job as a recruiter is to find the best talent, which means evaluating from a diverse set of backgrounds and going out into these different areas and pulling talent in, as opposed to just letting it kind of roll through your email.
We have one at my previous company, and the easiest way to avoid the homogeny is when the referral comes through, it goes right through the recruiting team and or myself. The hiring managers don't know that it's a referral, period. And the person who referred the candidate is not allowed to divulge that it is a referral, and a referral does not go to the top of the list. It goes in with the pipeline as with everybody else.
I took like 3 sips and had to sit with it for a minute. I agreed with both of the things you both just said, and part of me is like, ooh, we might go change our process tomorrow. I don't think referrals or referral programs in general are inherently bad, right? They're not inherently bad, but they are meant to supplement an existing pipeline, right? They're not meant to be your sole source of talent. And one of the things we've also found to be useful and helpful with us is just to do a quick little experiment where we actually pulled data about the demographics of our referrals, right, that we were able to get. And we gave that back to our company. And we said, hey, we've asked you for referrals for 2 quarters now, and you've done so well. You've given us over 500 referrals at this point in time. That's great. And here's who you've given us. And we gave them the demographics. It's like, your referrals, only 30% of them were women, right? Of the URM candidates that were present, it was barely 9%, right? So now I want you to go back and be intentional about your referrals and comb through your LinkedIn profile of the people you met at X, Y, and Z function that you came to, you spoke to, who probably would be a great fit for this organization and for this role, and you've never thought about them again, right? You've never given them a second look. How about you go and do that, right? And go that way. And we've seen that. Now, the thing I do disagree with when it comes to referral programs is that the difference in value that we're placing, monetary value that we're placing on different groups. That I don't like. I'm actually not in support, it's an unpopular opinion in the D&I space, but I'm not in support of us saying when you submit a woman or an underrepresented person, like, you get $5,000 instead of $3,000, right? I think the message behind that is just so inherently awful to me personally. And so I would encourage you, if you're at an organization that does that, to please stop doing that immediately, because it doesn't feel right. It doesn't feel right to the people on the receiving end of that. Once you get into the organization, you're like, wow, so you really did do a push for that because somebody was just going to benefit more monetarily, personally, as opposed to because as an organization, this was something we valued and we knew it was the right thing to do, and because we already know the business, the reason why the business needs it. So, yeah, I'm not here for the difference in monetary rewards for different groups of people, but referral programs in general are not terrible, but should not be your primary source of talent.
Plus one to all of that. And on the data front, at one of my prior companies, I actually did a study. I did a pretty in-depth quality of hire study, and we created an NPS score where we assumed that a met expectation was like neutral, and that a high quality hire would exceed expectations or higher. And we actually found that employee referrals were our #1 source of met expectation hire, and candidates that we had sourced or met through events were producing those outstanding and exceed expectation ratings. We actually presented the data back to the company as really a way to get them to kind of check the bias behind employee referrals and really push hard on that structured interview process, and make sure that referrals weren't introducing bias to the process. And a referral by any other name is just a candidate that should go through the same fair and consistent process as any other hire. And we saw a huge change in the behavior behind referrals after that.
So I just want to spend the last couple of minutes quickly talking about employer branding, since we talked about that and how hosting events is a great way to source candidates. So do your companies do any sort of employer branding strategies or recruiting marketing that you'd like to share that you find effective for boosting your pipeline?
I have a hard time with the branding. I'll be honest. Like we're just, I've only been at Arkose for 6 months. Our careers page is not up, which I'm actually happy about. The referral program was in place before I started. I made some changes to it. We're still working on our careers page because what I want to see, I'm hoping to get pushed through is don't show some of the employees. Right now we have our leadership team and our advisory board, and that's it on our About Us. I want to show all the employees. So don't show me a snapshot of the United Colors of Benetton at some company, which is so easy. Let's pick the Asian woman, the transgendered male, you can list it, right? And there's many tech companies that you look at About Us, and it's like, that looks like a really curated photo. I want to know, are there more than one of each one of those people that you are profiling? Because to be honest, nobody wants to be the one of anything. One of the greatest successes that we had at MoveWeb, my former company, was we were looking for somebody in marketing, and it was going to be, ironically, the first woman hire on that specific team. It was actually the revenue team. And it was like, don't hire one, hire more than one. No one wants to be the only female engineer on a team. No one wants to be the only Southeast Asian in quality assurance. No one wants to be the only, you name it. No one wants to be the only one. Guaranteed they'll end up on the About Us page if they are, but if you can be strategic, hire more than one. So we had 2 really strong women candidates who were competing for one marketing role, and we looked at it and I said, why can't we hire both? One can be content marketing, one can be demand gen. And it wasn't in the budget. Well, you can find the budget for it. How about, I don't know, no bevy machine for 6 months. There's the budget for the hire. I mean, some shit like that, I mean, it's you can find room for it. You can make the argument for it. But branding is really hard because it often looks really not authentic. So what I would like to do at my current company is let's show everybody. And I've seen Box did that. I haven't looked at them in a while, but like when you went to their page, you could literally click through and you could see every single employee working at the company, so that if you are a candidate looking for a company that is touting a DEI program, or you want to know what does the engineering team look like, and like 70% of our engineering team are women, and the engineering team is 3 people. Yes, you're right. Maybe I'm not good at math. Maybe that's not 70%, but you know what I'm saying? Like, those are important things, to look at in branding and to be authentic about it. If you don't have a huge diverse company, don't say that you are, but say that you're working on it. Find ways to show that you're working on it. Like, we're not going to the recruiting event at Stanford and Berkeley. We're going to San Jose State, and we're going to, San Francisco City College to look for recent graduates. Like, use your actions when you do branding. Post it on LinkedIn. This is the events that we're going to. This is the programs that we're having. We're co-hosting with Hire Club. We're co-hosting with the Expat Woman. That's how you brand yourself. Even if you don't have the program in place or you're not at at the diversity that you want, if you're making the effort, tout that you're making an effort. That goes a long way.
So we actually have to cut the panel because I want to give 5 minutes or so for people to ask questions. So let's pick, 2 or 3 people from the audience who have a question for the panel. Yes, go ahead.
Hi. First of all, I want to applaud you all thank you for your presentation and applaud you all for the work that you're actually doing. You're walking the talk and it's happening. And I've learned a lot of things. I'd like to bring up the topic of age discrimination and age diversity. Age discrimination is the most rampant form of discrimination, and I don't see companies dealing with that. And Addie, you mentioned about attracting more women software engineers if you had less experience. The truth of the matter, I come from a background, I do recruiting and I do job search coaching, so I have clients who fit all of these. But personally, I was a software engineer many decades ago, and there are many more women who were. So if you look at people with more experience, you're going to find women who've been coding a lot longer than a lot of the men. So, and I just want to know if there's anything that's being done about it, if there's any awareness, any conversations. Thank you.
For sure. I total agreement with you. And even if we look at the numbers, we know women in software engineering in the 90s, the rate was actually a lot higher than it is now, right? And we can talk about a lot of the structural issues that led to that in another panel. But I think, or right after this, because I have many things to say about it. But I think one of our partners, at least, is Path Forward. And Path Forward actually is meant specifically for folks returning to the workforce after being on a break. And what we've seen disproportionately, that group largely impacts women, right? And it's older women, and it's women who it's anybody who has had caregiving responsibilities. So not just for children, but also if you're caring for a sick parent or a sick family member. And so we've seen that. So we've partnered with them specifically to address that. We also did something that a lot of people don't do. We actually published our age data online because a lot of people just don't quite realize what they're getting into. And oftentimes publishing data doesn't seem like a huge action to a lot of people, but the number of LinkedIn messages I've gotten from people being like, hey, I am this, and I see that you have like X% of this group there. I need you to tell me what it's like to be there for this person, or what resources you have for this group of people, because I'm not interested in replying to your recruiter if I don't quite understand that. And I think to this point, it's also about being sincere. When we go back to employer branding and even this, it's about being sincere in like who's present and who's not present and what life is like at the organization. But I think you're absolutely spot on that it is something that we don't talk about broadly. It's not in the mainstream of tech. It is a large conversation in many other industries, just not here because we look so insularly too often, but we can talk about that another time too. But
Okay, we have time for one more question, and the panelists will be staying after for a few minutes if anybody wants to have a one-on-one chat with them. Yes?
One of my least favorite phrases currently in my office is you can't load the bar. This panel is hosted by Fidelity. I love Fidelity, we use it, but if I were to look back at the people who failed the test, it's disproportionately people who don't have a CS degree. Disproportionately women or people of color. That bothers me. I would love to lower them, honestly. I can't, it's not my city to. But I guess my question really is, how do you handle that? If you have a technical screening and certain demographics aren't passing that mark, what do you do?
I would say if it's a matter of how did those candidates get in your funnel and why aren't you looking for better ones? Like if your funnel has a certain amount of underrepresented minorities and they're not passing the bar, why aren't you going out and finding candidates that are going to pass the bar and meet those requirements, right? It might be a matter of like doubling your effort, finding get a new sourcer on board, hire a contract sourcer, and expand the amount of outreach you're doing to build more funnel so you do have more options. I think that if you're having like a quality of funnel issue, that's kind of fundamentally just like quality of funnel issue, raise the quality of your funnel by doing more outreach and better outreach.
Have someone outside your organization look at your technical test. Because that could be biasing as well. That could be like steering towards it's probably the person who made the test. You know, that's really important. We had that happen. Like why are all these people failing this technical test? Had someone outside the organization look at it and said, I can tell you why. It's looking for a very, very specific type of coder that probably comes from this school. I'm like, oh, I know where that came from. So look at your test, change your test, revet the test. And as you said, like, find better sourcers, find candidates who can pass your technical challenge. They're out there for sure.
Plus one to both of those things, and actually one of the features I really liked about Codelity is they actually gave us the option to have multiple test options, and the candidate could pick the test based on like what they knew their skills were going to be. So it would just assume there wasn't one right way to demonstrate their skills. And I found that was really helpful. And we'd administered the test to like over 500 people, and it was pretty evenly split across the 4 tests.
I'll spare you my pontificating. Because I just went on too long. But all I will say is, we will not be lowering the bar, quote unquote. Like, that's not a thing. And you should all erase that from your vocabulary also today. So you have 2 phrases to erase from your vocabulary tonight. That was the second one. We won't be doing that for anybody, right? And actually, when we go back to the first question, when you adopt a structured interview process, you actually raise the bar for everybody across the board. You're holding everybody to the same standard. And you all as recruiters, and I'm not going to call you the L word, but your job as a recruiter, right, is to go out and produce the most robust, diverse, qualified candidate pool possible. That is the core function of a recruiter, right? Which is why when I see diversity recruiter, I'm like, what does that even mean? Like, what? Like, there's one person responsible for bringing in women and people of color? Like, what? No, it's your job, it's your core function as a recruiter, and they should be held to the same standard as anybody else. And if you have actually determined the success criteria for a role, then it shouldn't be that difficult to locate the talent that's capable of doing all those things. They're out there. Oftentimes, we just aren't looking hard enough or in the right places. We choose to look in the exact same places that everybody else is looking, and then we cry, oh my God, they're not there, right? So expand your horizons, do what you're supposed to do, dig a little deeper, and do some more sourcing.
And I think also pair that with data, to the point about, like, there is no lowering the bar. If you put 1 underrepresented candidate in the funnel and 8 non-underrepresented candidates, and it takes 8 non-underrepresented candidates, you probably need 8 more underrepresented candidates. So, also use data to inform the decision as well.
Okay, well, please give a round of applause for our incredible panelists. Thank you all for sharing your best practices and your experiences. It's so valuable. I even learned a lot from you today, which is great. Thank you to Mabel and A-List and Codelity and Parasoma for everything today. Thank you all for coming. And the bar is still open. We'll be hanging out here, so please enjoy yourselves. Thanks.